Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is so nice to see you here in person on a beautiful, a beautiful fall weekend in Minnesota. I see some people in short sleeves. It's not always true in late October. We are here, glad you're here. My name is Kelly Gordon. I'm a producer at NPR News, kind of for all things Kerri Miller. So I'm here to welcome you to this next Talking Volumes conversation. We're really excited about it. Of course, I want to thank our sponsors who are making all of this possible. Bremer Bank, Becker Furniture World, and we have some educational sponsors, Luther College, St. Scholastica. We're so thankful to have people come alongside us in the Star Tribune and make this possible. Tonight's author, if you're not aware, if you have not been to a Talking Volumes event before, Dani Shapiro will be signing books after the event up here on the stage, and of course there are books for sale out in the lobby as well if you'd like to get a copy of Signal Fires. You don't have that yet. And our partner, the Star Tribune, Sue Campbell, is our partner there, and she's going to come out and tell us a little bit about what the Star Tribune has coming up, Sue, for all of our readers and our book lovers.
Well, look at all the happy readers out there. Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
So if you got the Star Tribune today, you will see that there was a fantastic profile of Ross Gay, who will be here next week as part of this program. It's not too late to click on the story if you didn't read it, and we appreciate all of you continuing to read and support our books coverage. And the other thing that I want to remind everyone of is that coming up on November 27th, we'll have our holiday gift guide for books. So look forward to that.
Yes.
And have a great time tonight. Dani's amazing.
Yes, we're excited. Thank you. And thank you to the Star Tribune. We're grateful. Without further ado, let's bring out award-winning journalist Kerri Miller to start our Talking Volumes conversation.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. It's good to have you here. I'm going to welcome you with a warning. If you have walked in tonight carrying a secret, I suggest you guard it well. Because if it's just come into your head, push it out. Dani Shapiro has a way of just kind of absorbing, sensing the secret that you've carried in. She has this extraordinary gift for winkling those secrets out of people, and people tell her things that you would not believe. Have you listened to her podcast? I just marvel out of the things that people tell her. So what is it about Dani Shapiro and secrets? Well, she was the family secret in her childhood. She has a podcast called Family Secrets, and the words family secret appear on the 4th page of her new novel. Still, this isn't a one-way street. I, too, have a way of getting family secrets out of people. Dani Shapiro is the author of memoirs and novels. She's the host of the podcast Family Secrets, and her new novel is titled Signal Fires. Please give her a warm welcome to the stage of the Fitzgerald Theater. You do have a way of winkling secrets out of people. What's your technique? What's your secret? What is your secret?
It's so great to be with you, Kerri. I think I listen with compassion. Right. Maybe that has something to do with it. Although I feel like all my life I've had a big "tell me your secrets" neon sign over my head.
You do?
Yeah.
People what? Because people would just kind of offer up their deepest, darkest confessions to you?
Well, once I started writing memoir, what I realized was that I would make a new friend, say, I would move to a new town and make a new friend, and I would have coffee with that friend, and that friend would proceed to tell me their deepest, darkest secret, and never ask me anything about myself. And what I realized is that what they were really trying to do was level the playing field, that they felt that they knew a lot about me, so they were sharing a lot about themselves.
One of the things that we were talking about downstairs is that I think you listen without a sense of shock or prurience. People feel like they can tell you things because you're not going to run away and say, you're not going to believe what so-and-so just told me. I mean, you take this in with a great generosity, I think. And I guess I wonder how you reached that that kind of demeanor, that acceptance?
I think somewhere along the way, I started to really understand that underneath all of our various external trappings and our CVs and our stories about ourselves, we're all kind of the same. And we have the same feelings. We have the same fear that if people really knew us, they wouldn't love us as much. That
Right.
We all have, we've all experienced that kind of shame. Or, one year, maybe about 10 years ago, I was teaching a large group of people a retreat, and I looked out at this audience of a couple of hundred people, and I said, here's a writing prompt. I want you to write the thing that if anyone knew about you, you would die of mortification.
Oh my God, what?
You have 3 minutes to do it.
Oh, what?
And then when you're done, you can rip it up, you can burn it, you can throw it away. Just go, just start writing. And I was sitting, up on sort of a dais, and I had a good view of the crowd. And I can tell you, no one hesitated.
Really?
No one sat back and thought, shame, shame, what would that be?
Ashamed
What
about.
could that possibly be that I could? No one hesitated. And that was such an interesting sort of revelation to me. But the deeper one actually was that, what if and I would never do this because this would be a cruel and terrible thing to do. What if I had said, just kidding, now you all have to share?
That's right.
And what I realized is that actually the whole room would just be in tears and would feel this sense of solidarity and understanding and, oh, is that what you were afraid of? That's not so bad. So it just, and that came, that was hard won for me, but I really did come to know that and believe that. And it helps me to feel like I can connect and that people can connect with me on a pretty profound level. I'm not so good at cocktail party chatter.
Right. The meaningless kind of talk.
Yeah.
What do you think is the power in the naming of that shame, these people that were at your retreat? And then I guess, studying it or looking at it in ink, I put it down, can't take it back. This is it. What do you think the power is in that?
Well, it's interesting because that's really a private moment, right? That's
Right.
But even though it's a private moment and even though no one else is going to see it, there's a leap that happens of actually naming it, writing it down, seeing it there, that is terrifying for many people. And what is the power of it? I think it's the beginning of a sense that there is, that there's something that is liberating and freeing in being able to just say the thing. When we have secrets, we're really not letting ourselves be known. And when we're not letting ourselves be known, then we're not really, in a way, that's ungenerous. If I can let myself be known, then you're more likely to let yourself be known, and on it goes. And so, I can tell you that on my podcast, at the end of every episode, I'll ask a guest, do you wish you hadn't found this out? Or do you wish that you hadn't revealed this? And not one guest has said yes. I wish I hadn't known. Not one. Because there is this sense of liberation.
This is the vulnerability that someone like Brené Brown writes about, right? The power in letting yourself be seen. I've thought a lot about some of the things that she writes about, the dangerous stories that we tell ourselves in intersection with some of the work that you're doing. She talks about the story that we tell ourselves about lovability, and so often it's a distorted sense of lovability. If people knew this about me, if they knew this secret, I would be seen as unlovable. And so my life is dedicated to guarding this secret.
Right, which paradoxically actually creates a kind of unlovability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, are there at the center of a lot of the people that you're talking with, and maybe your own experience with this, is there this sense that this has defined who I am, and people will judge me in a way that is not at all generous or compassionate? And so my life is pretty much committed to making sure that no one ever knows this about me.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and that creates it's like a closed door. It creates such a sense of kind of encasement,
Right.
and of a lack. I mean, we live in a culture where vulnerability, I mean, it's a buzzword, but vulnerability is scary. We're all supposed to be confident and present these polished fronts,
Right.
and filtered on social media, and there's nothing that's real about that. And yet that's the way that that's what our culture seems to reward. But I actually think that the deeper rewards are in allowing ourselves to be seen and known.
I mean, when do you think you really got comfortable with this sense of vulnerability? And I ask that knowing that you grew up in a family for which appearances were pretty important, right? And hiding the truth of who you were and who your parents were.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought of, when you said that, I thought of what it was like to talk with my mother even as a young adult, or go shopping with her, and she would say, "How do you want to look?"
Really?
Yeah, like not what you want to wear, or like, how do you want to look? How do you want to present yourself? And that's an old habit that dies hard, but that was really something I was very much really born and bred to have a kind of perfect, polished facade. It didn't do me any favors as I entered young adulthood. So when was it? I think that it was probably well into my 30s. And writing is something that teaches me so much about how to live. I mean, each one of, I mark my life both in terms of, I have one child, so both in terms of motherhood and how old my son was at any given moment, and in terms of what book I was writing. And the books that I've written have taught me so much about how to live. And there was one memoir in particular, my memoir, Devotion, that really, it was about a kind of excavation, a sort of early midlife existential crisis, spiritual excavation, that where I was asking the question, what do I believe? And I was afraid when that book came out that no one would read it, that it would be, I mean, I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home. I had complicated relationships with each of my parents in different ways. I lost my father young. That's all in the book. I became a mother and had a son who was very sick as an infant. That's also in the book. And I thought to myself, would you have to be a formerly Orthodox Jewish mother of one child who was sick as a baby, who lost her father when they were young, who has an existential midlife crisis in order to be my reader? And
That's great.
and what happened when the book came out was my inbox was flooded with responses from readers, and what they all said was, "You've told my story."
Wow.
And it was men and women and old and young and every religious background or non-religious background, atheists. I seemed to have struck a universal chord by telling my very particular, specific story. And I think that that's actually what does connect us, is our really specific stories when we're brave enough to share them, or to just feel like we can own, this is who I am, this is the sum of my life, this is the measure of my days. And there's something about that I think creates a real sense of connectedness.
I love that, because in some ways you're saying there's a divinity at the center of that, and that is this idea that we're all connected. And that divinity doesn't mean I've experienced Dani's faith the way, or I've experienced a faith the way Dani has experienced her faith, but it is a conviction that at the heart of it, there is human connection. And that's the exemplar of it, isn't it?
Exactly. And you know, when the way that I was raised, it was us and them.
Really?
Oh, very much so. There was
Outside of the Orthodox
outside of the
community?
Orthodox community, outside of the Jewish community, but particularly the Orthodox community. This is the way we do things. And I never felt comfortable with that. I never felt, I didn't understand the wisdom of that, or the kindness of that, or the, and I think, look, a lot of religions do versions of this. It certainly is not just Orthodox Judaism. But one of the realizations I had was that all or nothing way of thinking. For me, if it was going to be all or nothing, I was definitely going to go with nothing. And that I had to actually find my path. I had to find my way. And another thing that I realized during that period of time was all I did was open myself up. I thought, I'm going to live in the questions. I'm not looking for answers. What would it be to just ask these questions and see what happens? I'm not going to go to India. I'm not going to go to Israel. I'm not going to.
You're not going to eat, pray,
I'm
love
not going
your
to eat,
way
pray, love.
to...
I'm not looking for answers out there. And the most amazing thing happened, because I live in a rural part of New England. It's not a bustling metropolis. And when I opened myself up, almost immediately, people started entering my world, my orbit, in this almost mystical way. It was, I met an extraordinary Buddhist, mindfulness teacher that many of you may be familiar with now, named Sylvia Boorstein, who was one of the great,
absolutely.
one of the great mindfulness teachers. She became first my teacher, then my mentor, then one of my dearest friends.
Wow.
I met a great rabbi who was doing Torah study, studying the Old Testament. A friend of mine asked if I wanted to join a Torah study group, which would have had me running for the hills. But I was saying yes instead of saying no. So I said yes, and then it turned out that it was really like a book club about Genesis. We were reading it as literature, and that's my jam. So I was suddenly really, really engaged with, you know, the whole idea of the Bible essentially as people behaving badly, you know, and then finally a yogi, a brilliant writer named Stephen Cope, who I also met completely by happenstance. This all happened because I opened myself up, and the universal threads that connect all of us began to spin their web.
One of the other stories that I think, I don't know if it leads to secrets, but it leads to kind of a shrinking inside, is this idea of creativity and how the exterior culture judges creativity. Who gets to be creative and who doesn't? I mean, think about the way people will diminish. You know, maybe you do a different job during the day, but you have this wonderful outlet as a creative. But how do you talk about that to people? It's often kind of diminished. And I think I'm interested in your view on this. I think if people felt freer to let that creative flag fly, there'd be more acceptance. Okay, you don't make huge money from your art, but it it nourishes who you are. You must see this in some of your retreats and in some of your interactions. I'm curious about how you view it.
I see it all the time, and also that same diminishment happens even to artists and writers who who do have a career and make. I mean, I wrote a book called Still Writing.
Yeah,
because regularly I would be at social events, and invariably, or a dinner party, and someone would say, "So, are you still writing?" And I felt like saying, "Are you still doing that brain surgery thing? I mean, how's your law practice treating you? Are you still an attorney?" I came to realize, I actually did a little study, and I asked every well-known artist, photographer, writer that I would run across in my travels whether they encountered the same thing, and every single one of them did. Artists whose work hangs in the finest museums in the world. Are you still painting?
What is
you still doing that
that?
sculpture thing? What is that? I think that it's hard for us to take in the idea of a life in which something is created out of nothing. There's also, to go back to sort of the culture that we live in, there are steps you take. You go to school, and then people start asking you in 7th grade where you're going to go to college. And then you go to college, and people ask you before you even get there what you're going to major in. And way before you graduate, what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And there really, I think, is a sense that we have, that there is a path, and that the key to a successful life, and we could define success, but to a successful life is to follow that path. And creativity doesn't follow that path.
Right.
And artists don't follow that path. And every writer who you talk to has a different journey to having become a writer. And so when I teach and when I lead retreats, and when I talk to people who are starting out, or who have who do this kind of work as hobbies, I think there's such a knee-jerk feeling of, oh, it's just this thing I do, or devaluing it.
Right.
And what that all boils down to is permission. And no one out there is going to give you permission. No one out there is going to say, why don't you really carve out this hour every morning before your kids get up? Or why don't you spend an hour after you get home from work making this thing, doing this thing that is sacred to you? No one's going to do that. It has to come from us. And that is, I think, the key, whether it's published writers with many books to their name, or someone who's just deriving great joy and pleasure from knitting or making jewelry or gardening. I think we think of these things as squeezing them into the margins of our lives, while everything else, once everything else is accomplished and we've checked every box, maybe we can do that, but that it's frivolous. And I would argue that it's the opposite of frivolous, that it's where we find ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and this is somebody who had had a very public career as a diplomat. And the person doing the interview asked, well, what are you doing these days? And they talked about doing watercolors, and it was skipped over completely as, isn't that a cute little hobby that you've done now that your public life is over? There was a kind of an unacknowledged, I guess, interest there about why that was the art that this person, or why that was the creative expression that this person had turned to, and maybe how that intersected with this very public life as a diplomat.
It seems like a missed opportunity not to know more about that, because that's also, our lives are lived in chapters. And so this very public chapter, or, I think about the chapter of raising a family, or, we have our childhood chapter, we have our young adult chapter, we have our midlife chapter, and if we're lucky enough to live long lives, we have chapters that are after the big career or the set of accomplishments that we're going to be judged by, and why devalue that chapter?
Right.
And also, why not really understand why are you drawn to this?
What chapter do you think you're in your life? That was a softball. You served it right up.
I'm feeling very deeply grateful and fortunate right now because I just had a big birthday. I turned 60.
Happy birthday.
Oh, ooh. And I'm not winding down. If anything, I feel like I'm in the most creative time in my life, and one in which I'm taking risks and feel freer to take risks than I ever have before, both creatively and also in terms of different kinds of storytelling. It's a very particular moment. I realized at some point during the pandemic, I was asked to record the audiobooks of some of my earlier books, and one of them was my memoir, Slow Motion. And so I'm in a sound booth recording this audiobook of Slow Motion, which was a memoir that I wrote in my early 30s, but was very much about my childhood and my early 20s, and my sort of rebellious, reckless early 20s, and the loss of my dad. And I realized as I was recording it that I was much closer to the age that my parents were when they were in the car crash that took my father's life, and that my son was essentially the age that I was when I was that hot mess.
Right.
And there was something about those worlds colliding that was so powerful for me. And thinking about now being, I think we can so easily, like the diplomat that you were talking about, be seen suddenly as less relevant because we're not at the beginning.
Right.
And beginnings are great, but I think I'm in the sort of thick of the middle, in this place that is where there's a lot of freedom to take risks, and I'm just so grateful for that.
One of the things that, in listening to your podcast and reading your memoirs, I know you have given some thought to and heard a lot about the character of shame. I'm curious about eight seasons, starting your 8th season of the podcast.
Yes.
Curious about what you've now come to understand, other than shame can really distort your life and your identity. But other than that, what do you understand about why so many of us carry shame and what it means?
I would add to the shame sandwich trauma, and all kinds of trauma. Trauma is also a buzzword, so I want to be careful with it. But there's big trauma, and then there are the traumas that we experience, over the course of living. And like, if you've ever fallen on, like, I remember falling on the street one day, walking from a lunch, and I was wearing stupid platform shoes, and it was a sunny day, and it was the middle of the day, and I just went down. I was walking with a friend, and I went down, and really sort of scraped myself up. But the feeling I had instantly was, I'm okay, and getting back up on my feet, and it was shame. It was vulnerability. It was the feeling of, oh, that didn't just happen. I'm going to just pretend that just didn't happen and keep walking, even if I'm like bleeding. I'm going to just keep going.
I fell down Saturday. This big scrape on my, it was so embarrassing.
Right, and why? We're human beings.
Right.
But there's that. So that's an example of a very small human thing that happens to all of us. But I think that traumas and secrets are like little micro traumas, or sometimes not so micro. They make us feel that we're doing something wrong, that, again, that no one would understand, that there's something the matter with us. And so, I mean, one of the things I've seen in now 70 plus interviews that I've done that are real deep dives on family secrets is that that's why the secret is kept. If I speak this, you're not gonna, you're going to shun me. I'm too afraid to take that risk, so I'm gonna stay in the safe zone. But I do think that it attaches itself to trauma, and also to move all through the kind of range of traumas. It's so often people say, well, this was bad, but it wasn't as bad as. And, there's always something worse, but it's almost a disavowing. It's like putting it into a context of, this is really rough, but other people have it rougher. And I think that also comes from that place of shame.
I mean, you put that idea at the center, I think, of Signal Fires, where each character has a shame to bear, and then there's this traumatic incident that the family is all in different ways dealing with. And, I wondered what new questions you were asking yourself about it as you were conceiving of the dynamic of this family.
I was thinking a lot about interconnectedness, and also about being what it is to be known or not be known.
Right.
And, at the heart of Signal Fires is the fabric that I was talking about, is that sense of interwovenness, interconnectedness. When I was speaking to you about devotion and the way that invisible threads just started winding itself, in this beautiful way into this tapestry, when I opened myself to it, I wasn't conscious of this while I was writing Signal Fires, but I was very aware of the profound interconnectedness of these 7 characters whose lives span the 50 years that the book takes place during. And in the case of some of the characters, they share a secret. And I was also very interested in what it does to not just not speak of a secret publicly, but to be a family that holds it, not just from the public, and they speak of it behind closed doors. No, they never speak of it to each other. And what does that do to their dynamics and to their relationship? And then the other family that's very important in Signal Fires, who lives across the street, it's a very different kind of secret keeping. It's almost a stretch to call it secret keeping, but it's that fear. There's so much fear in that family, and it's of being themselves. That they have a son who is this miraculous, magical boy, and both parents, but particularly the dad, are so afraid to let him be him. They're afraid that if he doesn't check all those boxes, if he isn't normal, quote unquote, it's out of love, but they're afraid that he's not going to have a successful life unless he toes the line. And so they almost, they can't stunt his growth because he's just bigger than that. But in a way, that's the kind of secret life that's going on in their household.
The other thing that struck me about the family, the first family where this traumatic event has happened and it ripples through each family member's lives is people, how that shapes their sense of, it shapes their moral code in some ways. It shapes the way they see themselves, their integrity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They do things that I got the sense that without this traumatic event and this secret would not have been something that made up who they were. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I very much thought of most of their lives. I mean, there's a father, a mother, and a son and a daughter. The mother's life, I don't think, is shaped as much by
That's
it
right.
because,
Yeah.
in a way, the family dynamic is the mother, whose name is Mimi, she very much wants and needs life to be lovely. Mm-hmm. And it is a lovely life. And she is determined that this traumatic incident is not going to change that. And she's the one, the night in question, the night of the event, she's the one who says to her husband, we don't have to talk about this. We can never speak of this again. But her husband, Ben, and her son and daughter, Theo and Sarah, are consumed, mostly Theo and Sarah, because the event is their doing. Mm-hmm. They are consumed with guilt and almost survivor's guilt, and it becomes, because they don't express it, because they don't speak of it, it grows in its power over the course of their lives. And even though they each grow up to have what on the surface look to be extremely successful lives, they are being shaped and whittled and damaged by holding that secret.
There's a corrosiveness that, those characters, Theo and Sarah, probably wouldn't identify or acknowledge, but you can see how this is working on, like I said, their integrity, their idea of who they are and how they want to be in the world. But it's so subtle.
I think what I was writing toward, and it was a question that I had as I was working on the novel, was, secrets have energy. Mm-hmm. I recently heard it said that when you bury a secret, you bury it alive.
Oh, that's good.
I thought that was really good.
That is.
And Carl Jung describes secrets as psychic poison. Oh. And I know from my own experience of a secret being held from me that it absolutely did impact me. Not knowing for all of those years formed and shaped me without my knowing how or why. And that when it was revealed, when I did come to know the nature of that secret, it truly set me free. And even though it was painful and difficult, it was life-altering in a way that could easily have not happened if I had never discovered it. And my life would have just missed the mark. No matter how many books, there was something about me that did not completely add up to me. And actually, I remember being with Oprah and being interviewed by Oprah and talking about my childhood with Oprah. And at one point, I looked into Oprah's eyes, and she was just looking at me like, really? And I didn't know, but I remembered that later. Something didn't totally add up. Mm-hmm. And so...
This is before you knew the secret.
This was probably 5 years before I knew the secret.
Oh.
So, her spidey sense just said, something. But I knew that. I had that feeling. And so I wanted these characters, I wanted them to reach a point where there was a kind of inevitability that this was going to have to find its way into consciousness and into being voiced. And for a chunk of the novel, I wasn't entirely sure whether it would or it wouldn't, but I wanted it to, which didn't mean that it would. As a novelist, I don't feel like I'm the puppeteer. I mean, my characters have a certain amount of agency, and I wanted to see what would evolve, but it became clearer and clearer that it was going to have to come out because it was destroying them, and they didn't want to be destroyed. They weren't broken people. They were flawed people who had held on to a secret for far too long.
Take a sip of water, and let's hear the first excerpt, if you're good with that. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about where we are in the story, as much as without giving too much away.
So we are on New Year's Eve of 1999, going into the year 2000, the Y2K New Year's Eve, which I now think of as just adorably quaint.
I know. Oh, my God.
We were all so worried the world was going to come to an end. And Theo has been away for a number of years. Theo and Sarah are at this moment in their 30s, and he has fled to Buenos Aires and really disappeared for 5 years, and he shows up at her door. And she is living in Los Angeles, and she's become a successful television producer. She has little kids. She has 2 twin girls, and she's married. Their lives couldn't be more different, and they're together again for the first time in 5 years.
Perfect.
Theo knows she wants to ask him why he's come back. The better question is, why did he leave in the first place? But they won't talk about it. Not tonight. She tilts back her glass and downs it, wipes her mouth with the back of her hand. Their eyes meet only fleetingly. In the space between them, there is a whole lost world. Street names, phone numbers, summer barbecues, broken bones, family dinners, shadows on walls, stolen turns, dappled light playing against floorboards, French toast sizzling in an iron skillet, pages of homework strewn across the dining room table, Beethoven quartets on Saturday afternoons, the smell of black Cavendish tobacco. 7, 6, 5. In his sister, her bare toes pointing toward each other, pigeon-like, her bitten nails, her small ears, he remembers everything he's tried to forget. He's not walking the road along the Chubut River now. He's not in a blur of motion in the center of a kitchen, preparing 14 dishes at once. He sits still. What choice does he have? His father's tortoise-shell reading glasses resting on top of a half-finished paperback, the creak on the 3rd stair, icicles in winter that would hang like spears from the eaves above his bedroom window, the way his mother would answer the phone, the 3 musical notes of her hello. Will you stay for a while, Sarah is asking him. He doesn't know the answer and he doesn't want to lie. I mean, she says, I'd really like you to stay for a while. She has softened. All the prickly edges he saw in her when he arrived have melted away, and what is left is a beautiful, vulnerable girl. In their backyard in Avalon, a hammock strung between 2 strong poplars, the 2 of them, deep in the ropes, limb over limb, inseparable. 2, 1, Happy New Year. A few renegade noisemakers screech. Time seems, for an instant, suspended. Kisses, slaps on backs, the further popping of corks. He leans forward and gives his sister a hug. He fights past the lump in his throat, the sting in his eyes. I'd like that too, he says. But what he really means is that he'd like to take this suspended moment, the new millennium already careening inexorably forward, and roll it back instead. Back through layers of time to a split second when things could have gone differently if only they had known. There must be that second, bobbing and darting in the aliveness of their shared history, unmistakable, glowing like a firefly in the darkness, if only they could pinpoint it and stop it there, right there at the small, indelible spot that somehow they missed the first time around. If only, then perhaps their whole family could begin again. Oh, who is he kidding? They both lean back on the deck chair, side by side, and gaze at the clear night sky. "We'll see," he says.
You make me swoon. You give me something to lose. Tie your string around my finger, just to see if it lingers. You make me bleed. You give me something to need. My withered emotions mark my hinging devotion. You could be everything. You could be my buried treasure. You could be the end of me, my greatest pain or my greatest pleasure, too vast to measure. Once I was blinded and free, I cared less that I couldn't see. Oh, but the risks that we take, oh, they shake me awake. And now I can't get back to sleep. You make me pay. Oh, it's costly to stay. If I reside in your village, would I receive any privilege? Oh, you could be, oh, everything. You could be my buried treasure. You could be the end of me. Oh, my greatest pain, oh, my greatest pleasure. Oh, you could be everything. Well, you could be my buried treasure. Well, you could be the end of me, my greatest pain or my greatest pleasure, too vast to measure. Thank you.
Myers. Oh, that's beautiful. Jordan, don't go away. Jordan. What's the story of the song? It's really beautiful. What's the story of the song?
That's definitely a song I wrote during a moment of uncertainty where I was interested in someone and wasn't sure where it was going to land. It was that kind of liminal space of being really hopeful but being very frightened. And in that moment of uncertainty, that's also filled with hope.
Where did it land?
It didn't end well.
Okay. Thus the yearning in your tone.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you. It's good to have you here. You're listening to Talking Volumes at the Fitzgerald Theater with Dani Shapiro. Her new novel is titled Signal Fires, and I'm Kerri Miller. You know, I don't usually ask about titles, but this is such a beautiful image. Okay, where does it come from?
It comes from, it's the epigraph of the novel. It comes from a poem by Caroline Forche,
Right.
the great poet. And strangely, I discovered the poem on Twitter.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Ah.
Which I really sort of appreciate, because whenever I've been on Twitter over the years, my day is not going well. You know, my writing day is not. And there's a popular hashtag on Twitter that writers use, which is hashtag #amwriting.
Ah.
And I always look at it and think, no, you're not. You know, and I'm not either. We're not writing. We're on this social media platform, and the Ukrainian poet Ilya Kaminsky, Ukrainian-American poet, had tweeted asking people to share poems and stories and novels and memoirs that dealt in interesting ways about memory. And because I have so much respect for Ilya Kaminsky, and I'm very interested in memory, I went down the rabbit hole. And down that rabbit hole was this poem, and I read that particular stanza, and the phrase "signal fires." I had finished the novel, and I didn't have a title.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh.
I mean, I
really?
was in search of a title, but I wasn't at that moment in search of a title. You never find a title when you're in search of a title. But it just rose to the surface, and there it was.
There is also isn't there an epigraph from Sylvia Plath?
No, the epigraph is from Caroline Forche.
Okay, right. Some of the characters in the novel are also experiencing, I guess this comes along with shame, this powerful sense of regret. And I wonder if in your book tours you've been hearing Daniel Pink talk about, he's been everywhere talking about the science of regret. It's so interesting. One of the things that he has found in researching this is that we often regret communicates our values. We regret things that, are deeply meaningful to us. And that, this is his argument, is that then this tells us who we are, and that regrets are not something to avoid, that they're to embrace. There's so much regret, unexpressed, buried in some ways in this novel among these characters. I guess I was curious about how you think about that, and then I'm going to ask you about your own regrets.
Just letting me know that.
Yeah,
so that
give me a little warning
so that I can
on
have a little
that.
split screen in my mind. Well,
That's right.
When you say that about the characters, there's one character in particular that I think of, which is the character named Shankman.
Yeah.
Shankman has no first name. He's just Shankman. His wife calls him Shankman. Everyone calls him Shankman. And he is the father of Waldo, this really magical boy. And Shankman can't tolerate Waldo's specialness and his uniqueness, so his love for him comes out as rage. Right. And he just wants him to be the kid in the outfield who is going to catch the ball, not the kid in the outfield who's dropped his mitt and is looking up at the stars because he's obsessed with the cosmos. And there's a moment late in the book where Shankman, because we've moved through a lot of large swaths of time in the novel, and there's a moment where Shankman is, it's 2020, and we briefly catch up with Shankman in 2020, and he is aware that he really messed up the one thing in life, the most important thing in life not to mess up, which is that he was a terrible father for this kid who he was aware always that he didn't deserve. There was a way in which he had that awareness.
Right.
And that having to hold that at the end or toward the, in the later part of a life, when there's probably nothing that can be done to remedy it, I found to be really, a tragedy of sorts for him.
Yeah, that's pretty unbearable because there's really no rewrite. I mean, unless it's, I thought a lot about that, is the only way to remedy an experience like that to be as vulnerable as you can be before your child, maybe your grown child.
And I think for Schenkman, he is just simply incapable of that kind of vulnerability. And he sees the world in a very kind of competitive, comparative kind of way. And I think when one sees the world that way, one's always going to be feeling like one's left kind of in the dust in some way.
Right.
There's always going to be someone who does it better or has more or what. And so the world that is reflected back to Schenkman is one in which he's this kind of striver who can't get to the thing that he's striving for. And so there's, this bitterness that takes hold in him. And there probably were times along the way where he could have done it differently, but he couldn't. And, as the novelist, I had a lot of compassion for him, but I just kept on thinking, oh, Schenkman, can you just get out of your own way? Because he's to me really the only character. I mean, there are other regrets, but in some of the other characters, but I think of them as having much less haunted lives. Even Sarah and Theo being haunted by this secret. I wouldn't say that that's regret. I think that that's more like they've stuffed it somewhere where it kind of keeps on having a heartbeat.
I even thought of Ben, the physician father, whose wife, again, says, we'll never speak of this. He is self-aware enough to know what that means and to understand how that has shaped his children's lives, even if he doesn't know the full extent of what it has meant for them. That has to be powerful.
That's true, and he does regret. He actively regrets the couple of moments in the past, and he thinks about them. One was a car trip where he could have said, let's talk about this.
Right.
And instead they turn on an audiobook of Bonfire of the Vanities. The moments that are like, where the possibilities of a door opening up are there, that then we pass over. I'm very interested in that because Ben is certainly a character who has the awareness, but just has this, partly out of his love for his wife, who doesn't want to go there, and partly out of his own sort of natural reticence, he just defaults to continuing to stay silent about it, even though, it never goes away for him. And there's one moment, and it's actually something that I added fairly late in the writing, where he quietly goes and establishes a scholarship in the name of this girl who died in the tragedy, and never tells a soul, just does it because it's the right thing to do, and he really always tries to do the right thing, but he never breathes a word about it.
What is it, do you think, that interests you so much in those moments where that, life can kind of turn?
Well, because life is handing you an opportunity in those moments. Life's handing you a gift. I think it goes back to the idea of courage and vulnerability. Like if in this moment that thing could be expressed, it would then alter everything that follows. And it's really, there's a refrain in the novel, change one thing and everything changes. And there are these moments that could go differently and don't. And the accretion of those moments, the accumulation of those moments, are maybe add up to a kind of regret that becomes impenetrable.
So how do you think about the things you regret?
I think that was a pregnant pause. Sorry. I think I have found a way to metabolize them by continuing to live life in the direction that moves me away from either behavior or choices that, say, I made as a young woman. And it's almost like whatever those, and I don't really experience them as regrets now because I've experienced them as I wouldn't be here without that. I couldn't change one thing and everything changes. If I had done that better, then what followed would have changed, and I wouldn't have, what happened next wouldn't have happened, and then what happened next wouldn't have happened, and so. So it's as if the regret itself becomes diluted, like a bit of, that like colored food poisoning when you drop it into a glass of water and it just...
Food coloring.
Food.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Miller.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, that actually sounds like a very you are not immersed in, and why would you be? I mean, you have, a successful career, you're at the peak of your creative power, you feel, and you do not let yourself be enveloped with a sense of, if I'd only known the choice that I was making. Right. Like some of these characters.
I think a saving grace for me is that I made certainly my share of mistakes, but I was also good at getting out of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I somehow managed to not do any of the things that then become permanent choices. I was married prior to my long and happy marriage, but I didn't have children in that marriage. Moments like that are, at one point Sarah Wilf, the character Sarah in Signal Fires, says, if you, there are certain things in life that you can't alter.
Right.
And she ruminates about that, and she says, because she's also in the middle of a torrid, horrible, very ill-considered affair. And she says, if you kill someone, you're a murderer. If you are not faithful to your partner, you are an adulterer. These are things that you are. That you can't then undo and not be. And she experiences herself as both of those things, and they're sort of intractable for her. Nothing for me was like that. And I would also say that, in this journey that I've been on of making the discovery about my own identity, and when I found out that my dad had not been my biological father, I was at a point in life when there still, at least ostensibly, was time. There was time to learn what had happened. There were still people who were living where I might be able to discover things about what had happened. And I was also able to make meaning out of what had happened, out of this secret having been kept from me all my life, because I was like, wow, I'm a writer. I have written 9 books at that point that all in one way or another circled around the subject of the corrosive power of secrets, and I was the secret, as it turns out.
Right.
And I had the tools and the ability and the the capacity to make meaning out of what was otherwise a fairly traumatic and complicated discovery. And then along the way, over these last several years since Inheritance was published, I've talked to a lot of people, both on my podcast and then on book tour and in my travels, and people who've been in touch with me who have made similar discoveries, because we're talking about regret, right? And one of the things that I've come to realize, and I think that this is true of secrets in general and regret, is that when we find out something is at least as important as what we find out. And so an 85-year-old woman, true story, who finds out that she had never known she was adopted. Wow. What's she going to do with that at 85? It's unlikely that she's going to be able to make meaning out of it. It's more like, if there's ever I wish I hadn't known that, it might be when it's not possible to unpack it. Right. It's not possible to make meaning out of it, either by making art out of it or becoming an activist, or there are many different, forming groups with other people who have had similar experiences. There are many different ways to make meaning, but in the absence of that, I think what is left is a lot of regret. And maybe one of the reasons why I don't experience all that much regret is because I've spent my life wresting the meaning out of just about everything that has ever happened to me, or every experience that I've ever had, finding the story in it, finding the meaning in it, and connecting it with something that's universal that then people can also relate to and identify with and experience. And that is a tremendously gratifying thing.
I have a question about something you said a little earlier about how there were moments and decisions you made and moments in your life, the previous marriage, the decision or the luck, I guess, since that marriage was going to end, of not having children, whether you think that's luck or the way you described that, I thought she has a kind of slipperiness, in the best way, in the best sense of the word, to have kind of sluiced through that situation and come out unsinged in some ways.
I love that. I think I had in equal measures in those years self-destructive tendencies and a very strong will to survive. Both. Wow. And I didn't have children in that marriage because there was just no way that I was going to have children in that marriage. That wasn't luck. I remember my mother taking me out for coffee, and I told her how miserable I was, and she said, "When are you going to have children?"
Oh, really?
Yeah. Thanks, Mom. And I couldn't. There was something in me that was just on a cellular level that was just no. And so that was, I think, the part of me that was the good slippery part, that could extricate myself. I think that's what you mean by that.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, I also was, getting into all sorts of, hot water during those years.
I'm curious, since you've mentioned Inheritance, and I'm sure most people here have read it. Can I ask what your relationship is like today with your biological Dan Walden, right? Ben Walden.
I refer to him as Ben Walden in the book. That's a pseudonym.
Okay.
Because I promised him and myself very early on. It was so obvious that I was going to write a book about this. It was the story of my life. And it was very important to me to protect his identity.
Okay.
And I'm sure it won't escape people's notice that
Yes.
Ben Wilf has the same first name and initial as Ben Walden. I do want to say something about that.
Okay, good.
I started this novel 15 years ago.
Oh.
And Ben Walden was a fully fleshed out character. All of the characters, I knew them, I loved them, I understood them, and I hit a wall. I couldn't figure out how to tell the story. And I ended up putting it in a drawer. But the early parts of the novel, when we first meet Ben in 2010, and he's an older doctor looking out the window of his home, and he's there on the last night that he's ever going to live in this home. His boxes are all packed up. I wrote all that 15 years ago.
Wow.
And when I returned to the novel, which is not something I ever thought I would do, I really felt like it was the one that got away, and I wasn't going to find it again. I had made, the discovery about my dad. I had done a great deal of thinking about interconnectedness and the ways in which, why do we sometimes feel like we know someone when they're new to us, or we don't know them well? What is the fabric? What are the ways in which we are connected? And I think my thinking about that deepened over those years and making that discovery. And then during the pandemic, we were all experiencing that, the feeling that we are all in this together, and that interdependence and that interconnectedness. And so I returned to the novel, and I did crack it open. And it being 2020 and it being the pandemic actually was the thing that allowed me to crack it open, because I thought, who would these characters be now, 10 years later? And it allowed me back in. But when I finished the novel, and it was in manuscript, I gave it to my son, who's an early reader of mine. He's a wonderful reader. And he read the pages, he read the manuscript, and he said, "Mom, Ben is just like," and then he said the real name of my biological father. "He's just like him." And I thought, he is. You're right, he is. It was as if I had conjured him 15 years earlier, and he returned to me. I mean, I conjured someone that I did not know existed in some way that I will never fully understand. But readers would think that I probably created that character after those experiences, but I didn't. In regard to my biological father, one thing I'll say is that part of my I don't want to say deal, because that's not right. Part of our understanding is I'm not going to write about him again. I don't really talk about our current relationship, because it feels like we wouldn't be able to really have a current relationship if I continued to talk about it publicly. But I will say that the thing that is the undercurrent of that relationship, and the thing that made that relationship possible, is kindness. That everyone brought their best self to that discovery. Not necessarily immediately, because it's such a shocking and strange thing to learn, and you're dealing with a relationship that there's no playbook for, and with people's expectations of privacy, and the idea that this was a secret that could never come to light. But of course, we're living in a time when hundreds of thousands of exactly those kinds of secrets are coming to light.
Right.
But there was a tremendous amount of kindness there, which I have come to learn is actually an ethical term. One of the things I did on tour for Inheritance is I went to bioethics programs, a whole bunch, and spoke to bioethics professors and students. And at one of them, it was at Johns Hopkins, the head of the bioethics program and I were talking, and she said, I said to her, the way that I think of my relationship with him is that it's based on kindness, and I know that that's not an ethical term. And she just paused and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, that is an ethical term. That's something, kindness is something we talk about all the time."
Wow. So the relationship continues
Yeah, it does.
in a
You know,
way that is gratifying to you?
what I would say is that one of the things I kept on asking myself all through this journey, what am I learning that is universal? What am I learning that this experience is teaching me that I wouldn't have been able to learn otherwise, and that is revelatory in any way? And one of the things I'm learning is that our families are the people that we've grown up with. Full stop. They're the people that we've grappled with. You know, that passage that you had me read about Theo and Sarah,
Right.
that's their shared
Yeah.
history.
Right.
The fact that they happen to be biological siblings is not incidental to that shared history, but it's not that shared history. And so the feeling of being a family, I think, is probably impossible to have with people with whom one doesn't have that shared history. But there is also the biological connection of familiarity, which is something that is so strange and eerie to discover
That's
when
true.
you didn't have it,
Right.
and you didn't know you didn't have it, and then you discover it. And it's really like a certain kind of way of being in the world is mirrored back at you. I mean, I have the same gestures as my biological father. We like the same writers. He's a very good writer. I mean, I understood where some of my temperament came from. And so he is profoundly familiar to me, but he doesn't feel like my father.
Wow. Would you read one other excerpt?
So just to set this up a little bit, this is a scene between Waldo and his dad. Waldo has witnessed something fairly profound, and he's trying to make sense of it. And he's with his parents in a car. "Do you think it's true, Dad?" Waldo asks. The iPad is tucked under his arm. He's never going to let it out of his sight again if he can help it. If she can help it. Alice understands. Alice is Waldo's mother. Alice understands that for Waldo, the device is a lifeline. "Do you think it's true that I helped the lady, Mrs. Wilf?" Alice watches the back of Schenkman's head. Say the right thing for once. Schenkman takes a moment instead of his usual barking back. "I do, actually." He clears his throat multiple times, an old nervous habit. Even though Alice can't see his face, she can feel him, searching for the words. Schenkman used to do this when they were first together, when he was trying to express his love for her and didn't know how. Her heart aches for him, just a tiny bit. "I think this falls under the category of things we can't understand," he says, "but let me try. I have a story to tell you, Waldo. You know Dr. Wilf?" "Don't be mad at me, Dad. Last night I was showing him..." Schenkman shakes his head. "I'm not mad. But I want you to know that you've met Dr. Wilf before, a long time ago." His eyes meet Alice's in the rearview mirror. "Yes, this. Go ahead." She's always wondered if they should tell Waldo about the day he was born. Schenkman and she rarely discuss it anymore, but it's a current that runs between them. At school plays, when they grab each other's hand as Waldo recites his lines, at the winter solstice concert, his little face glowing in the third row, at the educational psychologist appointment when they were first told that Waldo's IQ was genius level. It all so easily could have been otherwise. She knows that she and Schenkman both carry in their lonely hearts the shadow story, the one in which Benjamin Wilf was not across the street unloading groceries from his car, the one in which the ambulance came too late, the one in which Waldo Schenkman did not live to become this strange and serious, miraculous boy. "Dr. Wilf is the reason you're here," Schenkman says. Dr. Wilf saved your life. As Schenkman tells Waldo just the bare minimum of detail, trying not to scare him. You came early, we couldn't get to the hospital in time. Dr. Wilf delivered you right there on the kitchen floor. Alice notes that Waldo doesn't seem in the least surprised. He's nodding his head as if this were not news to him. Maybe he's in shock. Maybe this is too much. Alice rushes in to fill the gap. We don't need to talk about it now if you don't want to, she says. We can just... Yeah, Waldo says. He's looking straight ahead, though not at anything in particular. Everything is connected. Everything. The lady, the doctor, me, you. It's like we're part of a galactic supercluster. Alice looks to see whether Schenkman's shoulders are inching up. Let it go. She beams the thought at him, but she can already see that he's going to let it go. Tell me more, Schenkman says, his voice more gentle than she's heard it in years. Tell me more about the galactic supercluster. A supercluster is a large group of smaller galaxy clusters. Our supercluster is called Laniakea. Waldo speaks rapidly, as if Schenkman might shut him down. Superclusters are the largest known structures in the universe. The existence of them means that not all galaxies are the same. Some are drawn together in groups. Others are alone in large voids of space. He sounds almost as if he were reciting something from a textbook by memory, like he's trying to say something bigger, deeper, private thoughts for which he doesn't have language. Everything is connected.
Got me feeling mighty fine when you put me at the end of your line. How could you think I'm gonna stay when you never walk my way now? Ooh, like a flower, I need sunlight, but you keep me in your shadow. Call me one more time. Hold me like you're mine. One more night. One more night. Look me in the eye. I wanna be the fire in your life. Oh, in your life. It's enough to say goodbye. Oh. You always were a wordsmith, babe, painting over your mistakes. Your kisses could charm a snake. They shroud you in a holy glaze, but ooh, you're melting now. The rust is coming out. No, you're not gold and silver. No. Call me one more time. Hold me like you're mine. Oh, one more night. One more night. Look me in the eye. I wanna be the fire in your life. Oh, in your life. It's enough to say goodbye. just this last night. Look me in the eye. I tried to be the fire in your life, in your life. It's enough to say goodbye. Oh, 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 oh.
Jordan Myers. Thank you. Thank you. Dani will be signing books up here on the stage, and I think the backlist and the new novel is also for sale out there. I shouldn't say this, but this will be my favorite conversation of the season. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kerri. Loved it.